Here lies the body of William J., who died maintaining his right-of-way. He was right, dead right, as he sped along, but he's just as dead as if he'd been dead wrong. One thing I like about Boston, it's a great walking city. It was established, I believe, in the 1600s, and it was set up along walking paths. Everything was walkable at the time, because they didn't have cars, and people mostly walked everywhere. So if you look at the streets, they all wind all over the place, but it's all close together and everything's walkable. They do have areas like the Back Bay in Cambridge that you now have to take the T, or you have to take a taxi or something to get there. But the main part of town is all walkable along twisting paths where you're going to get lost, but what the heck, who cares? Now, back in 1776, during the nation's bicentennial, they said, hey, there's a lot of history in this town. Why don't we make a trail that connects all of the places, all of the historical places, and people can take it and learn about history and walk the trail. And so they built a line that they put all the way along the streets, past all the major historic landmarks here in downtown Boston. They call it the Freedom Trail, and you can do it just by following the line of bricks or a line of paint on the ground, and there are stops all the way along the way. We're going to walk that. We're going to show you some of that. If you want, you can take guided tours. If you want, you can do a self-guided tour. They give out little tape recordings and headphones, and you can wear those, and it'll tell you all about the history and all the places you've been by. And it's a wonderful thing to do if you like American history, like I do. I love American history. As a boy, I used to read everything I could about American history. And the first time I came to Boston, I just fell in love with the town because so much about the Revolutionary War history started here. This is considered the cradle of liberty. Boston is a really big town into freedom and rights and that type of thing. And it's a great city to visit. You should definitely come here and definitely walk the Freedom Trail while you're here. We're in the Omni Parker House Hotel. Now, I like this hotel. I stayed here the very first time I came to Boston about 38 years ago. It was a fun place to stay. But more than that, it's a really historic hotel. This place was built in 1855, and it's been around for a long time. The original hotel building was knocked down in 1927, and the one we're standing in now was rebuilt, and eventually it became an Omni, but it was always the Parker House, right back from 1855 when it was built. It was great. For you foodies in the group, the bar here, or actually the cafe here, the Parker House, is where a lot of really famous people worked. It's where a lot of famous dishes were formed. You know Boston cream pie, the cake with the custard in between and the chocolate on top? It was invented here at the Parker House. You've heard of Parker House rolls, the little rolls with the fancy fans on the top? They were invented here. They still make both of those things here today, and it's great. As far as people who worked here, Ho Chi Minh was a baker here in beginning of the 20th century. Malcolm X, he worked as a busboy in the restaurant as Malcolm Little. And Emeril Lagasse started his career here as a sous chef. And so the bar, the restaurant, the hotel, all famous, all historic. Back in the 1850s, 1860s, they started a group here called the Saturday Club. The Saturday Club included authors, poets, essayists, all kinds of politicians, ambassadors, and members became Ralph Waldo Emerson, you've heard of him, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. John F. Kennedy announced his candidacy for the presidency here in the Parker House. This is a really historic place, and it's really kind of fun to come and look around and enjoy the history and say, hey, this is a place that really holds some gravitas. So let's look around and enjoy the place. John Wilkes Booth stayed here 8 days before he went off to Washington, D.C. and assassinated President Lincoln. You know, you want to talk about a hotel that's got all kinds of history, some of it dark, some of it light. It's Stephen King. You know Stephen King, the author? He wrote a book about the hotel room, and then I think John Cusack starred in it, like Room 1402 or something. That was actually based on Room 303 here in the Parker House. So there's a lot of history, and I could go on and on and on. You know, you can look it up, you can find out all kinds of information about this place. This hotel has almost 200 years of history, and it's certainly something worth checking into, and it's a fun place to come. And when you're walking the Freedom Trail, this is a stop you shouldn't miss. One of my favorite stops on the Freedom Trail is the Granary Burying Ground. Now, why is it called a burying ground and not a cemetery? Well, Boston was full of Quakers and Puritans, and they didn't believe in cemeteries. Instead, they had burying grounds. Their beliefs are a lot different than what our current modern beliefs are in Christianity, that type of thing. So this was fun. They had these burying grounds. There are a lot of famous people here in this particular one, which is why it is a part of the Freedom Trail. One person who's buried here, Paul Revere. Now, everybody knows about Paul Revere. Why do you know about it? The poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Well, did you know that Paul Revere was no big deal back when he was alive? Back then, there were probably 4 or 5 riders that went out from Boston in towards Cambridge, in towards Lexington and Concord to give the word out that the British were invading America. Well, Paul Revere was only one of multiple people, and in fact, Paul Revere never made it. He got captured by the British and thrown in prison. But right before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was looking for a way to get people interested in the United States of America and make them really excited about this place. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow had just written this poem, you know, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore shall be. And this poem was put out, and people were getting really excited about patriotism and the United States. Actually, that's why he set up Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving wasn't celebrated back at the 1700s. It wasn't until around 1862, 1863, when Lincoln was trying to get patriotism going, that he created the concept of Thanksgiving, declared a national day of Thanksgiving, and to this day we think it goes all the way back to the Pilgrims. Well, it talks about the Pilgrims, but it doesn't go all the way back to the Pilgrims. But anyway, there's so much history here. I could go on forever and ever, and I'm sorry, but I just love it. Now, standing at the entry to this burial ground is Jimmy Cole. He created these little guides. He does it and he hands it out to people for donations only. You're not required to pay for them. He just gives it to them. You just got to give it back to him at the end. But he shows you all of the famous people who are buried here. He tells you the stories about this place. And there are a lot of famous people. If you look behind me, you see the thing that says Franklin. That's Benjamin Franklin. That's his gravestone. Even though he lived in Philadelphia, apparently he's buried here in Boston. And, you know, there are, again, Paul Revere is here. I believe John Adams is here. John Hancock is here. People you've heard of, people you've read about, they're all buried here. And this is really a historic place. Here lies the body of William J., who died maintaining his right-of-way. He was right, dead right, as he sped along. But he's just as dead as if he'd been dead wrong. Now, of course, John Hancock would have the largest and most prominent grave in the entire burial ground. Because why not? He's John Hancock. We're standing here on Boston Common. This is actually one of the first public parks in the entire Americas. This was set up in 1634 when it was sold by some military guy. I don't know. He owned the land. He sold it to the city, and they set up this layout of the park. To this very day, it's a place where people come, they relax, they lay down, they enjoy it. The trees are beautiful here. In the fall, they change colors, and you have all the fall colors here. It's a beautiful place to come. This is also arguably the starting place of the American Revolutionary War. In Boston Common, they have what they called the Boston Massacre, where a bunch of people were up there protesting English rule and English taxes, and the British soldiers came and they killed them. They shot them. Now, there's an argument. Some people say that the colonists who were protesting were throwing rocks at the British and you know, that type of thing, and that they didn't start it, and that the British didn't actually just fire and murder them in cold blood. But it went across the country that the English murdered Americans in cold blood, and it was the start of the Revolutionary War. Now, everybody says the shot heard round the world. The one that started the Revolutionary War was across the bridge from Lexington to Concord, which is to the north of here. But arguably, the Boston Massacre was the start of the real American Revolutionary War. So Boston Common is really important. It's a public park and it's beautiful. Come here. This is also, by the way, where you can pick up your audio tour to go on the Freedom Trail, and I recommend you do it if you don't know the details. And I'll probably do it just so that I don't forget things that I want to tell you about.
All right. Do you want to set it up together?
Yes, let's do that.
Right, let's do that first.
Okay.
So, in case it doesn't work or something.
That's always a good thing. So they changed the system from the last time we were here several years ago. Now they no longer give you a little audio guide. Instead, what they do is they sell you a code so you can download an audio guide on your phone. You go to Walk-In Tours on your phone, you download the app. They then will sell you the two tours and headphones for $20, which isn't a bad deal. The problem is I tried to download the app and my phone isn't getting any service at all. They said there's a place called Wicked Free Wi-Fi out here that you can use to download it. I tried, it won't. So I'm going to do the rest of this thing basically from memory without the tour. But you guys, if you come here, you take the tour, you're going to have a lot more details that I can't tell you. So definitely it's worth doing. For $20, I was going to do it here. Just can't download the app. Now, if you can't buy one of those audio tours or the app, they do offer guided tours in person. You can pay for it. And the state park, you know, the Boston Common Ground, it's a state property. They also have free tours that you can do through them. Right now, we've got a paid guided tour behind us, and behind them, we have a free guided tour. So you definitely don't need to be without information when you're doing this walk. For those of you who watched the movie Glory, it wasn't about Denzel Washington and Matthew Broderick, but they were important in that war. Actually, here, this is a monument to the Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who was played by Matthew Broderick in the movie. Shaw was a big abolitionist, and he went down to help lead the... You saw the movie, you know the story. This is a monument to that story, and the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, and they were really important in the turning of the attitudes to the Civil War, and for the first time ever, African Americans, at the time they called them coloreds or black or whatever, they became important to reversing the Confederate hold on Southern America, and they were instrumental in winning the war. This artwork is considered one of the most important pieces of art in the entire United States, public art. It's really important. If you look at the faces of the soldiers on here, they're very intense and they're showing they're ready to do whatever it takes as they're marching into battle. You look at the face of the horse is terrified because it's not determined, it just doesn't want to be killed. It's a really interesting piece, and this in front of here, I believe, is where they dedicated the whole concept of Juneteenth, the now federally recognized holiday that is pretty important, and it recognizes the freedom of African Americans in the United States. Well, it was based on the signing of the 13th Amendment and the release of the slaves during the end of the Civil War, and this is a monument to all of it. And it's a really important monument, and it's a really amazing piece of art. It took him something like 13 years to finish. So it's definitely worth coming and checking out when you're here. Boston's nickname is Beantown. Why? Well, baked beans were a big thing in the colonial days, and Boston was a huge producer of molasses. Well, somewhere along the way, someone decided it might be fun to take the molasses and put it in with the baked beans, and they came up with a flavor treat that nobody had ever tried before. And Boston baked beans used to be a really big thing. Beans with brown sugar, molasses, they'd have salt pork in it, and it was just delicious, and people couldn't get enough of it. And Boston is the genesis of that, and Boston is where people came to try the original, and eventually Boston became named Beantown. Now, it's hard to find a good pot of baked beans here in Boston nowadays, but it's still around. You can still find it. Beantown Pub is a decent place to go get it, but there are other places as well. We're in front of the King's Chapel. It's actually the first Anglican Unitarian church in the 13 colonies. It was established way back when, and actually there were some big fights over whether or not they could set up, and the U.S. Supreme Court wound up ruling that they could in fact have their Anglican Unitarian church. The reason is they were a typical Christian church, and they had a preacher who was going to come in and be one of their ministers here. And ultimately, he was a Unitarian. He wasn't Catholic, he wasn't, Protestant or any of that stuff. And so the church, they refused to authorize him. They said, no, we won't let him. And so the church separated from the Christian church and became Unitarian because he was Unitarian, but they still read the Christian rites and Anglican stuff. And they have churches like this throughout New England now, but this was the very first one. This is actually the subject of a Supreme Court ruling. It's kind of a fun church to look around. It's beautiful inside, and you see the history when you go and check it out. It's wonderful. I'm leaning up against the donkey. This donkey is the Democratic donkey. It was actually created to revel in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, by the way, was created by Andrew Jackson when he was running for president, and his opponents labeled him a jackass. And so he said, you know what? The jackass is going to be the symbol of the Democratic Party. And it became the symbol of the Democratic Party. And here in Boston, they revel in having the jackass here in front of Old City Hall. I mentioned before that Benjamin Franklin lived in Philadelphia, but he's buried here. And the reason is he was born in Boston. This is a statue dedicated to Benjamin Franklin. And you see him behind me, and then they have on the side sort of a visage of the Declaration of Independence signing. And, again, this is the heart of American independence here. It really is. You have Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and then you have Boston. Philadelphia and Boston were the two bastions of independence in the colonies that ultimately led to the freedom that became the United States of America. And I just love walking around here and seeing this place. By the way, we're sitting here still in front of Old City Hall, and it's a beautiful place to just sit, relax, enjoy the birds, enjoy the shade of the trees, and take in the overall ambiance that is Boston.